Thank you. Maureen, I'm not sure if you heard the beginning of this at all. Then did you want to make any public comments?
No, that's fine. I can hear you now. Thank you.
Great. We just went around the room and introduced ourselves, and we'll continue. So we've allowed an hour and a half for today's meeting, John. We're going to go around the room and we're going to ask you some questions, and board members, like I said, are going to do that. I hope that you answer the questions in a timely fashion, so it gives us time after we've asked all of our formal questions that we can just kind of have a talk and ask you some more questions, but maybe some follow-up questions. And of course, I want to know if you have any questions for us or too. It's a great opportunity. Some of the questions, and I know you've got a list of the questions, have multiple parts to them. So feel free to write down whatever you'd like to do. And listen fully to the question before you do that. I also want to tell you that I know a lot of the board members put their heads down and are writing notes and stuff like that. So I'm sure you know that we're not paying attention to. We are paying attention to what we're saying. I usually have my computer screen up, but my computer died this morning, so it's great. The first half of this is going to be in the first 30 minutes will probably be in open session, and then we'll recess into executive session. So do you have any questions for us before we get started? Well, then we'll go ahead and start with Hal asking the first question.
Let's see. Briefly discuss your work experience, highlight the positions you've held that you think would make you a good fit for Bartlett.
Thank you. So the two most relevant are my time as the vice president of El Camino Hospital in Mountain View, California. That's the heart of Silver Valley. It's a not-for-profit community-based hospital. And in fact, in all three acute care hospitals where I've worked, all three are owned by a public entity. And the public entity has created a wholly owned subsidiary of a 501c3, and there's a community board that's appointed. And so there are these two entities, and so their board, each of them has board meetings. The public entity, that board is elected by the voters. And as I said, the 501c3 board is appointed by the elected board. And both the operating board and the ownership board, district board, have meetings. The public board, the district board, is subject to what's called the Brown Act in California. It's basically California's version of the Open Records Act. So everything has to be done, virtually everything has to be done in public. There are, as you understand, legal matters or personnel matters where the board could go into executive session. And my role there was largely external, so strategy, business development, PR, and a lot of other things. And then I left there and went to what was then called Marin General Hospital. But the structure was the same, a public entity with a separate 501c3 board under it. What was, I think, relevant is that at the time I left El Camino Hospital, it was, if not literally the most profitable community hospital in the country, certainly in the top 5. And I left and went to Marin, which was on the verge of financial collapse. There were 3 of us that assumed operational responsibility for Marin General. We had, let me just back up and say, it's the only trauma center in the county, the only full service hospital in the county, the largest employer in the county. And we assumed responsibility for the hospital with 2 days cash on hand. And if you can imagine this, no EMR, no electronic medical record, no payer contracts. And oh, by the way, the hospital didn't comply with the state seismic standards. So we had to build an entirely new hospital, even though we had no money. 10 years later, we cut the ribbon on a new $535 million state-of-the-art replacement hospital. And even though we spent all that money, we still had 100 days cash on the bank. And we did all that without across the board cuts without eliminating vital healthcare services. And over time improved our safety metrics, our quality metrics, and our satisfaction metrics. It took 10 years. It was not easy, but it was an extreme financial turnaround and one that nobody thought that we could achieve. So those would be the two I'd point to.
Yes.
Very briefly, how would you?
There are a number of things that we did. And so I don't have time to go through the whole list, but big picture. Initially, in order just to make payroll, we had to convince people to loan us money. So as an example, the County Board of Supervisors, this was not a county hospital, so the county had no formal ownership or oversight role. But as the only full service hospital in the county, if we had gone down, if that hospital had failed, it's not an exaggeration to say that people would have died. Marin is surrounded by water on three sides. The nearest full service hospital to the north is about 45 minutes away with no traffic. So the county board of supervisors, the five of them, as well as everyone else in the community, was personally committed to doing whatever they could do to make sure the hospital didn't fail. So they loaned us $20 million at 7% interest, which we paid back before the deadline for paying it back. We went to the payers, who likewise didn't want us to fail, and we got them to advance us 6 months of reimbursement, and that helped. And then once we did that, we were able to get a bank to loan us, provide us with a $30 million line of credit. And so that gave us, the combination of those three gave us enough breathing room that we could go sign a contract to get an EMR, and we could make payroll while we righted the ship. And then from there, there was just a long list of, I'll say, things that hospital administrators know to do to make your operation more efficient. So I'll give you two examples. One is labor expense management. There was no formal process for managing your deployment of labor in the house. So in other words, people would be assigned shifts and I'm going to work those shifts irrespective of census or acuity. As a result, our labor budget was about 35% above the benchmark. So we instituted a formal process and got our labor expenses under control, meaning got them to the benchmark. Another thing I'll point out is we did a formal review of our revenue cycle process. And we determined that, and this requires more explanation than you want me to give in this setting, but the revenue cycle process is briefly how you code, how you bill, and how you collect for the services that you're providing. The insurance companies have very sophisticated tools for denying payment for the services that providers bill for. And so we were able to then institute a formal improvement in our revenue cycle process, and that generated very, very significant results as well. Beyond that, it's just a lot of putting one foot in front of the other. Just another analogy I use is chopping wood. You know, you have so much to do to improve the operation, make it more efficient, and restore financial stability. And there were those two big things that we did, and then there were 100 smaller things that we did that just took a lot of work and perseverance.
I've got one follow-up too.
Go ahead,
And I was just trying to figure out where to best kind of ask this, and I think it's probably here. So Marin County, Mountain View, California, even more recently Dallas, are all very wealthy areas that have a pretty homogeneous population really in those particular locations, mainly white. They're certainly not small rural hospitals with a very diverse population. And I guess, and they're also, you know, kind of larger facilities as well that you're here. So help me translate your prior experience to this facility and why, you know, that prior experience really will translate to, you know, running what we hope to have as a critical access hospital here this year.
Sure. Just a couple things on the premise of the question. Marin is the least diverse county in the state of California. So I agree with you there. But in terms of the payer mix, the 20% of the patients live in the south part of the county closest to San Francisco. Many of them commute into the city for work, and they choose to get their health care at two of our competitors. Say ours are still there. Two of their competitors, and Kaiser has a 40% market share. So what's left is actually overwhelmingly either Medicare or Medi-Cal, Medicaid. So even though it is the seventh wealthiest county in the country, or certainly in the top 20, when I was there, it was 7. The actual patient population at that hospital is economically significantly more diverse than you would imagine, but ethnically not diverse. In the case of El Camino Hospital, it's actually astonishingly diverse. 20% of the primary service area is South Asian, 20% is East Asian, and it's only 40% Caucasian in the primary service area because it's so confounded and we have so many immigrants coming who work in tech. But neither of those clarifications speak to your question. So now I get to. I think that what's relevant about my experience and what will translate is a couple of things. One is what I said about the extreme financial turnaround. Bartlett is facing some, I'll say, significant financial challenges. I think that it's clear that you all and your interim leadership have done a lot of heavy lifting in the last several months, but there's more progress to be made. And I think that my experience in Marin certainly will be helpful in that process and position me to make a meaningful contribution to that journey that you're on too. The other thing goes back to the structure, and that is dealing with both a public entity and an elected board in a very visible political environment. And also trying to, and when I say trying to, I mean the executive leadership and this board operate the hospital not as a purely public entity like a county hospital. And so there is the significant experience I have dealing with the two boards, the public board, the elected board, and the private 501c3 board, and the dynamic there. And then dealing with all of the community stakeholders. I'll give you one more example. When we needed to rebuild or build a new hospital in Marin, Marin is a place that is famous for what they call NIMBYism. So very, very anti-development. I mean, if you have a deck on your house and it's rotting and you have to replace it, the permitting process and the public comment and the opposition to just, it's my private home, it's just a deck. What do you mean you're against me building my deck? And that's an actual example, is legendary. And this was going to be the largest construction project in the last or the next 20 years. So we had to go out to the community and persuade the community that this was so important that we needed to be allowed to build this, for Marin, gigantic construction project. We scheduled 101 events out in the community. So each city council, Rotary clubs, Taxpayers Association, Sierra Club, and I personally made the presentation at 100 of the 101 public presentations. And so my experience in community engagement, stakeholder engagement, I think is experience that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go on to the next question. Deb?
As a small hospital, Bartlett really needs a working CEO to get things done. In your previous roles, can you tell us about how you balance the demands of the day-to-day operations as a working CEO, community relations, and maintaining fiscal stability?
So as you all know, healthcare is a team sport. And so nothing that I've accomplished in my career was done by myself. It's always part of the team. And so having a strong clinical leader and CNO, COO, and having a strong CFO is absolutely essential for the success of the organization, certainly the success of the CEO. So there's I would say an appropriate delegation and reliance and respect for the work of the other senior executives on the team and a reliance on them. In terms of how I spend my time and prioritize my time, I guess I would start by saying I'm a rounder. When I was in Marin, in that role, I rounded every day, almost literally every day. If there was a day I didn't round, there was a specific reason why I didn't do it. I round at night, I round on weekends, and that rounding enabled me to have a better understanding of what was happening in the house day to day. It also served me in terms of building relationships, whether it was with physicians that I spoke to while I was rounding, our frontline staff, and by doing it a lot and being present a lot and being conducting myself in a manner that people experienced as approachable, that allowed for a flow of information that helped me to really have a better handle on the pulse of the operations. So I'm not just looking at the metrics, at the Excel spreadsheets and at the surveys. I'm also out on the floors every day, just trying to get a sense of what's happening on the floors and departments and how people are doing. I will just add that I also do round on patients and family members of patients, but my focus is really on employees and physicians. And I also view the role of the responsibility of community engagement, especially stakeholder engagement, as the primary responsibility of the CEO. So out meeting doctors in their offices, those that are hospital-based, meeting with elected officials and meeting with other key stakeholders, certainly meeting with board members, whether it's this board or in the case of Marin, district board, the elected board, and also we had a fundraising board meeting with those individuals, community leaders, and that's a critically important part of the CEO, and it takes the CEO out of their seat and out of the office, which means that you've got to have a strong clinical leader and you've got to have a strong financial leader so that the CEO can spend time in that role as chief, basically, I'll call it chief relationship officer with the stakeholders. So it's a balance, but I think that with a focus on leadership engagement, that's that would be.
I just want a quick follow-up. Yeah. So, because this is such a small hospital, how it is really important that our CEO be a working CEO. And I'm just kind of looking back at your resume and the different departments that were pointed to you. In what role were you the CEO? Because I see that at Marin, you were the COO, correct?
President and Chief Operating Officer.
So you weren't the CEO.
Correct.
So you reported to the CEO, correct?
Right. right, so,
I'm just what I'm saying.
yeah,
So as your role as the COO, you had the CFO, the CMO, the CNO, the chief health or the CHRO, the CIO, and the vice president of ancillary services and the vice president of support services, all pointing to you.
yes.
And you just pointed to the CEO, correct?
Yes, so it was a journey, I mean, at the end of the 10 years, those were my direct reports. Beginning of the 10 years, they were not. And so when we first started, we had a hospital with 4 walls. But what happened over time is that, for example, we built a significant outpatient operation, a medical foundation, a 1206 medical foundation. And when I left, we had 29 outpatient clinics, and indirectly employed what had previously been the independent physicians in the community. And so there was not only an expansion of the organization, but a restructuring of I'll call it the corporate structure. So Marin Health had a CEO, has a CEO that I reported to. And then the hospital operation of Marin Health and the outpatient clinic operation was reporting up to me. And that was part of my title as president. So I had the chief operating officer role where I had the people inside the hospital reporting to me. But in my role as president of the organization, that's why the chief HR officer and the CFO.
Thank you. Did you follow?
I do.
Okay, perfect.
So as a larger hospital, regardless of its location, you were able to have a pretty deep bench.
Yes.
So, which is not the case here. We're just not, we don't have the volume or in particular to be able to sustain that deep bench. So without that broad level of in your executive suite, what do you envision? I'm not going to say the organizational structure, but what do you envision your role to help pick up the gaps in what you had prior as support?
So I'll give this very specific hypothetical to answer your question. So here right now, you have one individual that has both the CNO title and the COO title, which I think for an organization this size is actually very common. So nothing to suggest there's something wrong with it. But it may be that there comes a time, and it could be now, or maybe at some point in the future, where because of what's happening in the House, the CNO responsibilities are such that that individual needs to spend a significantly greater amount of time on the CNO issues, and therefore doesn't really have as much time to focus on some of the non-nursing division issues that person has as COO. So because I've been a COO and had every department of the hospital reporting up to me, sterile processing, the lab, and everything else, my experience would position me to say to that person, hey, while you go and increase your focus and time on these issues, why don't you let me take care of lab and imaging and pharmacy for at least the next year, so that you can do the work you need to do and do focus on the nursing division. I'm not saying that's the case here, or it would be, but I'm just saying that because I'm not somebody who came up through one specific aspect of hospital administration. I've done everything from strategy, like I say, the startup process. So to the extent that the needs of the organization and given the way the executive team, leadership team is structured, I would be in a position to jump in and oversee any aspect of the operation for an extended period of time.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, just, we're like a half hour anyway.
Okay.
We'll ask two questions, so we kind of just move along a little bit quicker. Go ahead, Rex.
Yeah, thank you. John, being an enterprise fund of the city and borough of Juneau, essentially a department of the city on paper, Juneau, it has its benefits to the hospital. That, however, going through bureaucratic processes can be frustrating at times, to say the least. Tell us about an experience you had working in a bureaucratic, whether corporate or government setting, and how you got things done.
I'd say with both of the most recent acute care hospital experiences, with that dual board structure, there were times where issues came up that were, I'll just say, not helped by having to deal with two boards, one of which was public. Each of those boards would have a subcommittee that would take up the issue, and the two entities might not entirely agree. And to make it even more fun, you might have key stakeholders that likewise didn't necessarily agree that would be lobbying, in particular the public entity, to their particular view. And so at that point, there are a couple of things that are essential if you're gonna make progress and get through. Is relationships. You have to nurture those relationships so that when an issue comes up, you're not just showing up for the first time in a year and they're like, oh yeah, what was your name? Oh yeah, oh you're here. What do you need something from me? That's why you're here talking to me. So if you have those relationships in place, then I think it becomes more practical, more realistic to try and build consensus and bring people along with the stakeholders. There's a reality of public ownership and that things move more slowly at times, and it's just part of the nature of it at times. But I think that nurturing those relationships and clearly communicating frequently and transparently is how you get through it. And thankfully, in my experience at both of those hospitals, we were successful in getting the things done that we needed to, even when at the beginning of the process, it may have taken a lot more work than it would have just in a single board, private nonprofit entity that didn't have public accountability.
So, yesterday you were given a scenario. So we're gonna try to catch up on a little bit of time.
Okay.
So I said 15 or 20 minutes, but could you do this, wrap this up in 10 to 15? Presentation. Do you have it on a thumb drive or?
Anita's got.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would like to note that Dr. Jones has joined us.
Yes. I made sure you had audio and checked everything too, so he's good to go. Thank you.
Okay. Not that that's gonna be a way.
Dr. Jones, can you see the presentation on your
Oh,
screen?
sorry.
No, I can't.
She's getting it there. We're jumping the gun.
Okay.
Yeah, now I got it.
you see from over there? Are you,
I'm okay.
okay,
I'm gonna move my chair.
sorry.
Okay, so these are based on the scenario that was presented, these would be the priorities. And I would, for me, these would be the priorities in order. Go to the next slide. So under the first one, here are some specific things that I would propose to the board. I've mentioned labor productivity management, and along with that, span of control analysis, revenue cycle analysis, invest in core services that are at break even or better, reduce services that do not break even, particularly those that are not core, and seek new funding sources, whether that's government, state, feds, local philanthropy, or whether it's vendors or other businesses. Seek new funding. Safety, quality, and satisfaction. Safety is the number one goal in a hospital, the number one priority in a hospital. If everything's your number one priority, nothing's your number one priority, safety is number one. And so continuing while we're on a journey to restore financial stability, and while we're doing strategy and business development and all these other important things, always a requirement to stay focused on safety and quality and satisfaction. So you measure your outcomes and you share them. You're transparent with the outcomes, certainly with the staff, with the board, and with the community. Say, here's where we are. And if there's bad news, that gets shared as well. And you have a process in place to do follow-up and mitigation and address any issues that exist. Support a blameless culture that is absolutely critical if you're going to have a safety, a culture of safety. Celebrate successes, and there are a lot of ways to do that. And the focus on safety and transparency needs to be consistent. It's not, safety is not the destination, it's a journey. Next slide. Recruit and retain high quality staff and physicians. It's a challenge in most hospitals. And in a community like Juneau, it's there's some, say, special challenges doing that here. So review compensation. That's not just salary, but it's the whole comp, to make sure that, that the packages are competitive, and that that's not the reason why you're not able to attract and retain people. Cross training, which I know you do some of, the local training programs, which I know you do some of. And I also think that given the special challenges in Juneau, including housing, that it might be appropriate and helpful to at least explore temporary housing opportunities that the hospital could provide, whether it's for the temporary workers that come in or for the permanent workers that get recruited. So, restore staff and medical staff morale and confidence. This is a longer term project. Again, it's not a destination, it's a journey. And there are a number of things that are known to work. I've already talked about rounding. Rounding is, I think, critically important. You want an executive that brings what the literature refers to as the 3 A's: ability, availability, and affability. So you need leadership that has some experience, has some tools in their toolbox. But they could be Michael Jordan, the Michael Jordan of hospital administrators, but if they don't show up, that doesn't help you. So there needs to be availability, which speaks specifically to the rounding. And then the affability, you can round all the time, but if you scare people away and they're going to talk, then that's not helpful. So you need to be approachable and not punish people when they do approach you, particularly if they tell you something that you don't want to hear. So I would say the 3 A's are important. And I think looking at a formal engagement process strategy for both the staff and the medical staff. Communication is critical, and so you need a variety of ways that you're communicating: email, newsletters, videos, town halls, one-on-one meetings, group meetings. So an increase not only in the variety of communication, but also in the frequency of the communication. And then a shared governance approach I've seen work to great effect in the rest of the staff. Next slide, last slide, getting you back on time. Additionally, continue your exploration of transitioning to a critical access hospital. And then lastly, explore the possibility of a strategic affiliation. I want to be clear, I'm not talking about sale or lease or loss of control. At Marin, we did that. We sent out RFPs to everybody, including and especially our fiercest competitors. And we narrowed it down to 2, had a very formal process that the board went through and selected a strategic partner. Again, it's not ownership, it's not loss of control, it's not a lease, it's a true strategic partnership, which is currently working to great benefit for both organizations. So I think that would be something to look for basis. And I think you're back on schedule.
Thank you. Anybody have any follow-up questions to these slides? Okay. You want to take a single?
Well, I do have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So I was just re-looking at your CV.
Yeah.
I know you have a master's degree from University of California, Davis, and
Yes.
bachelor from Berkeley. What were those degrees in? And when did you get, particularly the master's?
So the degree from Berkeley, Go Bears, is in political science, and the master's is in state politics and policy. UC Davis is 20 minutes from the state capital of Sacramento, and so the program had you going to school in Davis and working doing a graduate fellowship at the state capital. So I was studying state policy and politics. Excuse me. There and yeah, wherever I've been in my career, I've been on point for government relations and community relations, and I'll just say that my work in school actually has been helpful in preparing me for that role.
If I could just follow up real quick. I'm not seeing anything formal about finance and accounting. You must have some. Is that all on the job, or do you have any formal training?
It's almost entirely on the job, although when I was at Marin, when I took on the role of president, I did go down to the Stanford School of Business and attended a week-long program on basically finance for non-finance executives. And I did complete that. I don't put it on the resume because as a Cal guy, I don't put Stanford on.
Thank you. So we're just going to take a quick 2-minute break here right now. Anybody needs to go to the restroom, and then we'll go to executive session and wait for Deb to come back.
Chairman, I move that we go into executive session. Hold it, Sandy, we need the actual wording. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I move to recess into executive session to discuss matters that the immediate knowledge of which would defame or prejudice the character or reputation of any person.
I second.
Here with that, we are officially in executive session. Just a quick reminder, Dr. Jones, that hopefully you're in a private area where no one can hear you and no one's walking around and all that good stuff.
The board is giving the direction to Chad and McKinney as our chair to negotiate with the successful candidate and then report back to the board on that.
Thank you very much. And our selection was unanimous, so.
Yeah, and it was unanimous selection.
Second that motion, Mr. Chairman.
It's not a motion, not a motion.
It's not a motion.
Direction.
It's a direction, just a direction. It's a direction. So as we're done here, then as we're done, Chad will come back with something you guys will see everything. I will make sure, and Chad will help me because I'm gonna be out of town on Friday, that the board gets informed before anybody. Okay, so Chad will help work. Again, thank you guys all very much. Awesome work, everybody, awesome. Everybody. Next, you got.
Fun, Max, 12:15.
Dr. Ross.
Well, 15.
Have a nice day.